The Tim Heale Podcasts. Ordinary people's extraordinary stories.
Welcome to the Tim Heale Podcast. In this episode, I've got a very, very special guest. I'd like to introduce her, Dame Caroline Dinenage MP. So, Caroline, you're in the room.
Hello, welcome. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I wish I was in your pub.
No, absolute pleasure. So, Dame Caroline, if you could tell me when and where you were born, if you can describe what it was like where you grew up, the schools you went to, and the education that you received.
Yeah, okay, cool. So I was born on the 28th of October. Do you need the year?
Not particularly. You don't ask ladies their age.
Born on the 28th of October, a really long time ago, in St Mary's Hospital, Portsmouth, and home in those days, or the home that I would have gone back to as a small bundle of joy, would have been in Ferndale in Waterlooville, where I was the only child of my mum and dad. My dad's Fred, he's off of the telly, and my mum had been a model, and then later on, when I was a bit older, she set up her own business, very successful business. And we lived there until I was 5. And then when I was 5, we moved to Hambledon, just a little bit further down the road, just over Portsdown Hill. And my parents are still in that same property. So we moved there in, I think, 1977. That'll give you that. There, you'll be able to do the working back now of when I was born. And I just had a very happy childhood. My brother and sister came along as a nice surprise. They're twins, the gruesome twosome, as I always used to call them when I was 10. But up until that point, it was just my mum and dad and me. And then I suddenly had all these two little bundles of joy in my life, and who I'm still really close to. And I went to a school that was called the Convent of the Cross back in. There's a horrible tendency for schools that I've been to have shut down. So I'm trying not to take it personally. I went to the Convent of the Cross in Waterlooville, which was a little Catholic day school. I'm not Catholic, but it was a Catholic day school where we used to wear a strange combination of a kilt and a beret. Oddly, I'd never really occurred to me that was an unusual combination at the age of 5. But there we go, and I loved that school so much. It began my life. Sorry.
Was that run by nuns or priests?
So I was about to say that, funnily enough. It began my obsession with nuns, which is why if you'd have asked me at probably the age of about 7 or 8 what I wanted to be when I grew up, I was obsessed with nuns. I loved watching The Sound of Music. I was destined to be Fräulein Maria. It's just the small, insignificant problems of not having a particularly good singing voice, and then discovering boys, I suppose, which made it all a little bit more complicated. So I was there until I was 11, and I just loved every minute of it. It was just brilliant school. I mean, we actually didn't have that many nuns. It was mainly regular teachers. We had a few, and then they just fed whatever you were brilliant at. They just fed that passion in you. And I used to love performing and drama. And I remember we performed The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Can you imagine what I was? I'll give you a clue. I wasn't the wardrobe.
I guess you wasn't the witch either.
I was. Some would say typecasting. And I just loved it. So that was that. And then when I was 11, because that was only a junior school, so then I moved to Wickham House at Fareham, which was a girls' school, and I was there until I was 16. That's also now shut. You're picking up a theme here, aren't you, Tim? And then I went to Oakland's Catholic Comprehensive School, which is in Waterlooville, which was the school next door to the one I'd started off at. So sort of came full circle, and again loved it. Made some brilliant friends, one of whom is still one of my best pals to this day, and godmother to my kids, etc. So that all kind of based in and around the same sort of area, really, my education. And then I got quite good qualifications, to the surprise of everybody, not least my parents and myself. And no one, I come from a massive family. My nan came from Cow Plain and was one of 9. So I always say if your surname is Smith and you live in the Portsmouth area, I'm almost certainly related to you. So no one in my family at that stage, that huge extended family, had ever been to university. And then suddenly I sort of came out with this raft of A-levels, and everyone was saying, "Oh, you really should do something with that. Go to university." And I took a year out where I thought about what I was going to do, and I applied, and I ended up going to Swansea to study a degree. So I took a year out. At which point I worked at Marks and Spencer's, which is where I'd been working as a Saturday girl throughout my A-levels. I did a shift up behind the bar at Cowdray Park Polo Club up at Midhurst, and I ended up starting my own business. That's a business that kind of grew and changed, and I ended up running right up until the point I became an MP.
Well, let's take you just back a little bit. Now, one of the questions I'd really like to ask is, what was it like growing up with a famous father that was on the telly? How was that?
I know, he's so fabulous, and I a lot of people ask this question, and it's a very disappointing answer in that I just cannot. I've never known anything different. And as a small child, it literally never really occurred to me. It took a while to occur to me that other people's dads didn't do the same sort of weird thing that mine did, you know. So when I was very little, when we were living in Waterlooville, Dad was on How, and in those days How was live as well. It wasn't pre-recorded. So, you know, when my dad used to make a cock up of some of the experiments, that was genuinely because they didn't have the opportunity to have another take. And Bunty James, who was one of his co-presenters, used to come and stay when the night before the program, and my dad used to often bring home some of the experiments to be able to practice. I just have this vague image of him setting up a kind of weird trapeze in the kitchen and trying to have a cork with forks sticking out of it, trying to walk along it. And I would only have been 5, but I just have this really strong memory of this sort of weird setup in the kitchen at one stage. So, you know, which is obviously one of his experiments he was doing. So it never really occurred to me that it was an odd thing for one's dad to do. And weirdly, because I've had a job which means that from time to time I have to pop up on the TV as well. My kids have grown up in the same environment where my dad's on telly and their mum's on telly. And so, you know, it just seems to be a thing that an entirely normal thing for people to do.
Fantastic. So let's have a look at the business that you set up. What was the business and how did you go about doing it?
So this came about because of my mum. My mum is a brilliant entrepreneur. She brought the idea of name badges to the UK in the 1970s through this company called Badgeman, and it was an American company. She brought it over to the UK, and she'd go to restaurants and everything, and all the staff used to wear little plastic name badges. I think they still do, and so that was my mum's company. At one stage, she had something like 30% market share of all the name badges, all in the UK. She's brilliant. Anyway, as part of this business in those days, she got this vinyl plotter. She'd taken over another company, and this vinyl plotter came with it. And I'd sort of said, can I have a little play around on this? And realized that you could make some really good signage out of it, you know, because it's basically vinyl lettering that you either stick on the side of a vehicle, or you can stick it on a board and make a fascia, or you can stick it on windows and make graphics, or you can stick it on a banner. And somehow managed to talk my way into getting the contract to do the vehicle livery for the Southern Co-op dairies, which is all these great 17.5-ton lorries with green and yellow stripes down the side. And so I set up a little business called CDS, Caroline Dinenage Signs. And I would regularly be seen sort of hanging off the side of a 17.5-ton lorry applying yellow and green stripes. And health and safety would have had a nightmare, but I guess in those days it wasn't a massive thing. And then the business grew, and then my mum, at one stage, my mum got sick. She was very poorly, and I moved my business into her premises in order to take over her business for a bit while she got better. She was out of work for about a year, and it worked really well. And we just decided to kind of smush the two businesses together by which time the business had changed its name to Recognition Express, and it had become like a franchised business across the UK. And and we sort of turned it into this kind of one-stop shop for all kind of corporate identity products. So my signs, her badges, and then we added things like pens and mugs and t-shirts and the baseball caps, such as the one you are supporting in a very elegant way today, all that kind of stuff. So all kind of merch we did, and that's what we were doing right up until the point that I became a member of Parliament.
Right. Before we get into the reasons and whys and wherefores for going to become an MP, let's just take you back a little bit. Let's have a look at your time in Swansea. What course did you do there? What possessed you to go that far away from Portsmouth?
So I'd looked at a ton of different universities. I'd applied for 5, and everywhere from York to Warwick to Swansea, and I'd only been as far as visiting. I went to go and visit the open days and things, and I'd only been as far as I'd been to Warwick, and I didn't think that was for me. Then I went to Swansea, and one of my dear pals was already there. She'd started the year before, and we just had the most fantastic time. And it was right on the beach, and coming from the seaside here, it just felt like a natural move for me. And I started off doing English, and in your first year, you have to choose 2 other things to do. And I just decided to choose 2 things that were interesting, but I didn't know anything about. So I chose ancient history, and I chose politics. And the politics was so fascinating that I ended up taking it as a joint honours with English, and that's what started this lifelong weird interest in politics, which has led us to this conversation.
So while you were at Swansea then, and you were taking politics, what was so fascinating? What hooked you into wanting to look into politics even more?
I guess because I've always been interested in history, and we did lots of courses on things like, the history of political thought, and, the history of, the Second World War, and, all sorts of, the history of conflict in the international system was one of my courses. So you can look at things historically, but it's also entirely current as well, and it seeps into every aspect of our everyday life. One of my lecturers was a guy called Clive Ponting, who, I don't know if you remember, he was the civil servant that hit the headlines during the Falklands War over the sinking of the Belgrano. And so it was historic, but it was also so utterly relevant to everyday life, and I just found it fascinating. And I was determined that at that stage that I wanted to be a journalist, and I wrote for the university newspaper, and so I wasn't party political in any way, shape, or form. I didn't have any party political affiliation, but it was just such an interesting subject. It really captured my imagination.
And were there lots of debates and that as part of the course that you took part in?
No, not really. I mean, I guess I'd imagine politics courses these days are a lot more party political. It was much more. It wasn't a sort of. There wasn't a huge amount of debate. No, I mean, I literally had never taken part in a debate. There was no debating society at my school. I don't think I'd ever taken part in a debate up until the point that I got elected. I mean, I was elected as a local councillor before I became an MP. So that would have been the first time I was ever involved in anything like that. It's not really, that doesn't really play to my strength. I'm not wildly argumentative. My husband's probably going to argue with me about that, but I think I'm not particularly confrontational or argumentative. And I'm sort of, if someone holds a different view from myself, I'm much more likely to say, oh yeah, well, that's fine. That's your own opinion. You crack on with it, than I am a bit likely to try and change their mind.
So you left university with a I guess a double first in English and politics.
It was a very comfortable second-class degree.
So where did you go when you left university? Did you come back to the Portsmouth area?
Yeah, back to home, my mum and dad in Hambledon, and back to running the business, which I I'd got in this brilliant lady who basically kept it ticking over while I was at uni. I used to, we used to do things like, I used to print car stickers, which used to say things like Swansea University BSc in Beach Studies, and sell them to help fund my university lifestyle. So we kept the business going through college, and then I went back to run it when I came back. Yeah, so back down to the south coast, and I've never, other than going to university, to my shame, I've never really lived anywhere else. But when you live in such an amazing part of the world, why would you want to?
Absolutely. I can vouch for that. I love it down here. Absolutely love it.
Yeah.
Right. So when did you stand to be a local councillor?
So this was very odd. This was in 1998, and it all happened completely by accident. People always go, Caroline, how did you get involved in politics? And I think they expect me to tell some story of having wanted to be Prime Minister since I was inspired by Margaret Thatcher at the age of 9 or something. And unfortunately, that wasn't ever the case. I mean, obviously she was very cool, but it didn't inspire my own career. Somebody asked me. So I had this brilliant, one of my lovely, lovely customers was a fabulous gentleman by the name of John Maxwell. He was a retired brigadier, and he used to sometimes just pop into my factory, which was in Horndean, and we would just sort of chat about issues of the day. And and I was, to be honest with you, I was bitching about the local council because my mum hadn't been very well. She had pneumonia, and she couldn't get any better because Hambledon used to keep flooding, and they had these green goddesses. Do you remember those? They used to sort of wheel those out, and they used to pump the water through the village to try and alleviate the flooding. This would happen about every 5 years, and my mum just had pneumonia, and she couldn't get any sleep because these bloody things were out. Sorry, pardon my French. These things were outside her house all day pumping, and I was bitching about this to my customer, and he said, well, if you don't like it, why don't you do something about it? And I said, well, I wouldn't even know how to begin to do that. And it turned out he was the chairman of the local Conservative branch. They didn't have a candidate for the upcoming local elections. It was 1998, Tim. I don't know if you can remember how desperately unpopular it was to be a Conservative in 1998. We just lost the general election the previous year by a massive landslide, right? So, I mean, if anyone thinks that politicians today are unpopular, wind back then. And so I was assured that I couldn't win this seat. It was the Lib Dem seat. The lady had held it for 2 terms. And but I thought, I'll give it a go. It'd be nice to tell my grandchildren one day that I stood for an election. So I was 25 at the time. Every night after work, I'd go out knocking on doors. And oddly enough, it seemed to rain all the time. I was wearing this bright yellow raincoat. And I don't know whether that had a beneficial influence in that people thought I was a Lib Dem walking up their drive. But somehow, when it came to the election, I won it. I overturned the Lib Dem majority. I was the only Conservative gain that year. It was Winchester Council. Hambledon's in the Winchester district. I was the only Tory gain that year. And I was the youngest councillor ever in the history of Winchester Council, which had been around for about 1,000 years. So, I mean, that's beaten now by someone far more young and fabulous, but up to that point, yeah. So it was a very interesting state of affairs.
So 1998 then. I mean, what was I doing in 98? Oh, can't.
In short trousers, no doubt, I should think.
Actually, I'm a lot older than you, so watch it. 98, I was that's the year that I got recruited onto the 15 UK Psychological Operations Group.
Oh my God, that's far more. That sounds far more complicated than being a local councillor.
The following year, I found myself in Kosovo.
Wow.
So, but that's a whole different story.
I can tell you where I'm asking you the questions. This sounds much more interesting.
Well, I can tell you a little bit about the old green goddesses.
Yes.
In 1977, we were posted down in Gillingham in Kent, and there was a fireman strike on, and we got trained up to go out on green goddesses. So we were down at St Mary's Dock, using all this firefighting equipment, and it takes 2 of you to hold the hose once you've got the pumps running on a green goddess. And if you're just by yourself holding it and they turn it up, you're off the ground. Literally lifts you off the ground. I mean, it's hard enough for 2 of you hanging onto it. So that's my experience of green goddesses. They are the pump on it is a fabulous piece of kit.
It's quite noisy though, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean the platform that they're on, the old Bedford RL, is it's something different, but the pump system is still a pretty good pump system. So on to the council, overturned a seat that had been held by Liberal Democrats for such a long time.
Well, I think for
bet that
2
put
terms,
a
I think
cat
she's been
amongst
for 8
pigeons.
years. So, but the old boy, lovely old boy, who'd been an old what do you call it, wing commander, who'd had the old Tory who'd held it 8 years previously. I nearly didn't stand because he rang me up and he went, "I'm hearing that you're thinking of standing for election." He said, "You can't do it. You're far too young and you're a woman. And you don't even live in the village," because at that point I'd just moved next door to the village of Denmead, and then so I thought to myself, "Oh right, okay, fair enough. Maybe I won't then." And then bizarrely, almost 5 minutes later, this remarkable lady who actually was a dear friend of mine up until she passed away just a few years ago, aged well into her 90s, Lady Diana Empson. Her husband had been very high up in the Royal Navy at one stage, and she rang me up, and she was also a ward councillor, and she said, "I hear you're thinking of standing. I think it's fabulous." And I said, "Well, I've just been told that I probably shouldn't do it because I'm too young." And she said, "That's absolute nonsense." She said, "Don't listen to that rubbish." She said, "You're going to do it, and I'm going to do everything I can to help you." And my God, she did. She came out with me nearly every night, knocking on doors. She was an absolute superstar, and remained a dear friend up until the point that she passed away a few years ago. Yeah, Lady Empson.
So, what was it like the first time you walked into the council chambers?
Yeah, it was just deeply odd, because it just seemed it's such an alien environment, isn't it? Anything like this, and the one in Winchester is obviously in the Guildhall, so it's all very grand and imposing. And in the same way, when I first got elected as a member of Parliament, it's almost kind of like an out of body experience, really, because it's just not a normal thing for anyone to do, and you just very quickly have to kind of adapt to this new normal, this new environment that you find yourself in, and pull yourself up and make sure that you get on with what you're there to do.
Mm. So, how long was you a councillor? I guess you had 4 years to start with.
Yeah, and then I got re-elected again, and then I ended up standing down because I got selected to fight the Portsmouth South parliamentary seat, so it was felt that I couldn't do the both, although I would have loved to have carried on doing it. So I was a councillor for 6 years, and then stood in Portsmouth South in 2005 against Mike Hancock, and I didn't win. Never expected to win, but I did halve his majority. I gave him a bit of a fright, and I think I got something like the 12th biggest swing in the country. So it was really interesting. But I decided I didn't want to do that again because it was really quite traumatic. So I went back to running my business. I mean, I've been running my business all the way through, but I went back to focus on running the business. Had another child. I had the first one when I was 7 months pregnant when I got selected to fight Portsmouth South. And then people had always said, "When are you going to come back? Are you going to come back?" And the only seat that I'd really set my sights on was Gosport, because I'd come over here I had some relatives here. My Uncle Jack lived on Elson Road, so we were always popping over. And I'd come over to the association to speak at a couple of events. And I just thought to myself, yeah, that's the sort of place I can see myself living. That's the sort of people I can see myself living amongst, people who, cared passionately about the community, people who've got a really strong sense of local, the importance of local issues and supporting each other, but people that don't take themselves too seriously, won't take me too seriously. People that will just sort of, it's not all, doffing of caps and not all Vincent and pearls. It's more real, and it's much more up my street. So I just felt that's the seat I would have loved. But at the time, Sir Peter Viggers had been reselected to fight the seat, so I kind of chalk that up to something that I would maybe look at another day when he decided to stand down. And then, of course, the expenses scandal happened, and Sir Peter, unfortunately for him, became the pin-up boy for the expenses scandal with his duck house, and he stood down, and suddenly the seat became available, and everyone said, "Well, you did say that you'd apply for it," and so I did. I put my hat in the ring, and the rest is history.
So you've now been our MP for how long?
12 years, nearly 12 years. 12 years next month. Isn't that amazing? It's gone so quickly.
Well, you got my vote the last time.
Oh, thanks.
So let's. I mean, I've seen what you've been doing around the bazaars in Gosport for since we moved down here, really. And I mean, how do you spend so much time in the local community? I mean, what happened when you got selected for was it a front bench seat?
Yeah, I did. I was a minister for 6.5 years, from 2015 through to last September. And I'm not going to lie, it's really difficult. You know, you trying to juggle being a minister, being a decent constituency MP, being a mum. I've got 2 kids, and trying to squeeze in being a half decent wife and daughter and brother and sister to my brother and my sister. So it's not, and you kind of spend the whole time feeling that you're not doing anything to the best of your ability. But my absolute number one priority is always my kids, making sure that they feel supported and loved and stable, and my constituency. So we live here. That's really, really important. We live here. The kids have been to school here. It's so I use the same local services. I use the same GP surgery when you can get an appointment. I use the same local supermarkets and all the same facilities. I'm walking on the local beaches, swimming in the local waters. So when people talk about issues, it's not a foreign thing to me. This is my life. It makes me laugh sometimes. People contact me and go, as if there must be some sort of mysterious second NHS that only deals with MPs, or second schooling system that only deals with MPs, or that I must live somewhere on a kind of offshore island where I don't get to experience everyday life. But no, my life is here, and that's really, really important to me. I never wanted to be a kind of a visiting MP. I wanted to be someone that was totally embedded in my community, and I love it. I'm always happiest down here.
So we've got elections coming up fairly soon, local elections. Are you having anything to do with that side of the support for the local candidates, or you sort of stand back and let them get on with it?
Well, I mean, so I don't have any sort of power or influence over the local authority. I'm not up for election. It's the local councillors that are. But clearly, I always say my job should come with a little bit of small print, in that actually MPs have literally no power whatsoever. We don't even get a sort of budget to spend in the local area. But what we do have is a little bit of influence, and it's really, really useful to make sure that it's really, really useful to have other people around who are really good and are really, really effective, and that you can work alongside to get things done. And that also requires having some really strong local councillors. So I have got myself involved in some of the local campaigning, because it's in my interests to have strong people elected that I know will be able to help me achieve stuff for my constituents. Because otherwise, I have no power over the local authority. I have to use sort of, those kind of partnerships and relationships in order to get things done. So I've been out knocking on a few doors. Yeah, I've been standing in Gosport High Street and Stubbington Town Centre, and and I love it. And it's it's a great opportunity for me to meet people and have a nice chit chat. I mean, people do always look a bit surprised when I'm knocking on their door. I was out and about last week knocking, and they go, "Oh, Caroline," and I go, "Yeah, I know, random. Sorry, here I am." Not trying to sell you anything, just out for a chat. It's really nice. It's always one of the favourite bits of my job, actually. We just don't get to do it enough. One guy said to me, "Why do we only see people at election time?" And I went, "Well, because when it's not election time, we're actually getting on with the job." If we spent the whole time knocking on your door, we wouldn't have any time to get things done, would we?
I guess that's you do only see councillors and MPs when it's coming up to election, and you're right. that if they did it all the time, they wouldn't have time to be able to get on with running the business.
Yeah, exactly. Especially in Parliament, because I needed to be there this week. I've this week I spoke on IVF treatment and the postcode lottery that impacts local people. I've spoken on our water quality, the bathing water quality, and how it needs to be checked more frequently. I've spoken on the online safety bill and the impact on the importance of keeping children safe online. Next week I've got a debate on childhood cancer. It's the first time there's ever been a debate on childhood cancer in the main floor of the House of Commons in main time, inspired by a little girl, Sophie Farrell from Stubbington, who'd lost her life to sarcoma. And and you can't do all that stuff. Sadly, that stuff doesn't get done if you're out and about knocking on doors.
Yeah. I mean, I follow what you do in Parliament, and it's great that you put it up on social media so lots more people can actually see you doing what we voted you to do.
Yeah, and it's what I'm paid for, and it's what I love, and and there's nothing better than actually trying to shift the dial on things that really make a difference to people's lives. It's the best thing of this job.
Yeah. Well, as an aside, next week, hopefully, I've got a few councillors coming on to my Thirsty Thursday live stream to talk about local issues. I'm going to be as fair as I can possibly be. I'm going to stay away from what's going on in Parliament.
Very sensible. Very sensible. Give them a good grilling, that's what I say.
Yeah. And so hopefully we've got lots of people that are going to ping in questions for the MPs. I'm able to have across the piece at least two from each of the parties.
Great.
To
tune in.
Take part in the live stream. And then the week after the election, I'm hoping to get any newly elected councillors in on the live stream to have a chat and to give their visions of their way forward.
Very good.
So to be absolutely sort of transparent, it's not a political party campaign speeches that I'm looking for. It's just their visions of what they've done for the local community, what they're looking to do for the local community of Gosport.
Yeah.
Because it's a fabulous place, and some of the opportunities we've got here going forward. I mean, the new enterprise zone down at Daedalus, the new bypass coming through Stubbington. Hopefully, it's going to be open fairly soon.
End of May.
Yeah. So keep your fingers crossed.
I've already had a drive along it.
Oh.
Yeah, no, it's very, very exciting.
Yes. But I think you're still going to get a bottleneck at this end.
Yeah, I mean, there's never going to be, because we're a peninsula, and because there's Fareham between us and any kind of major roads, there's always going to be, there's no silver bullet really. So so I've set about, A, getting the best road funding that we can, B, trying to generate more jobs here so less people have to leave to get to work, which is what the enterprise zone has been about. But I think we've all got to recognize that there's never ever going to be a day where you'll be able to drive on and off of Gosport and not sit in any form of traffic, in the same way that there isn't in any of the other sort of peninsula locations along our coast, like Portsmouth and Hailing Island. There's always going to be an element of that. But for me, it's just about making sure that we get our fair share of funding, and we've put every bit of effort we can into alleviating the situation as much as possible.
Which is fantastic, and I can see it is starting to work. I mean, being retired, I don't go out at sort of peak times, but when I do have to pop out at peak times, then it's not too bad.
It's not as bad as it used to be.
On Rowner Road is okay, leading up to the roundabout, and I think that roundabout kind of works quite well. Obviously, with the roadworks that they've had in, it has been a bit iffy at times, but generally, I think going out through Newgate Lane or going out through to Stubbington is going to be a lot better, I think.
Yeah, and if you can take all the traffic that, when it gets to the M27, it turns left, if you can take that off of the A32, then that will alleviate that corridor as well. I mean, there's still more to do. And as I say, MPs don't have any power. We just have a little bit of influence. So it's all been about sort of trying to use that influence to push for these changes. It's glacially slow when you come from a nice normal business background, but it's just the way that the system works.
Yeah. I mean, I blame Mr. Beeching.
Yeah, taking away our railway.
If he hadn't taken away our railway, we would have had that extra
exactly 100%
line out. But there you go. It's life. Unfortunately, we can't turn the clock back on that.
No.
But they have used the bus lanes on the old railway, which I think is easing the problem quite a bit.
Yeah, the bus lane's great. It's got really good service. So yeah, it's all work in progress, isn't it? Lots to do. And the day I've done it all is the day I'll have to hang up my my MP shoes, my MP hat.
So, a couple of final questions before I sort of pull the pin and let you go. Things are really, really difficult at the moment in Parliament, particularly for the Prime Minister, and is under a complete attack from all sides, including his own, which is possibly brought upon himself. I'm not going to ask you where you stand on that. In the next general election, that's possibly going to come up within the next couple of years, because I think they've just changed the system where he can call it when he wants, as to opposed to fixed term.
Yeah.
So, would you consider jumping ship to a new party like Reform UK?
No, I wouldn't ever. No, I would never change. I would never change. And well, I mean, no, you say no. I know, say never, say never. At the moment, I wouldn't ever consider changing. No, I think it's better. You know, the Conservative Party is fundamentally not only about the leadership. It's about all of the members and all of the local councillors and all of the members of Parliament and all of the voters that navigate it forward. And I think that inevitably we need to make some changes. There have been some things that have happened in the last couple of years that have been really difficult to swallow. Having said that, you know, I do honestly believe that on the big calls, on the really difficult issues like navigating the country through COVID and currently, you know, supporting our friends in Ukraine, the Prime Minister has shown remarkable leadership. So, but I would much rather, I'm always, in the same way that if I've got something I love to wear and it gets damaged or worn, I'd much rather mend it than throw it away. You know, clearly any party that's been in power for as long as we have, since 2010, you know, we'll always have a few issues to overcome at this stage. But I think I'd much rather mend them than walk away.
Yeah, I think that the other opposition party just aren't fit for purpose at the moment, and it's a real shame, because without decent opposition, it's not really holding the government to account.
And that has been a big problem. You know, I mean, I'm sure for every person that came up to me in the high street at the last general election and said, I'm voting for you because I want to get Brexit done, someone else came up to me and said, I'm voting for you because this country can't risk Jeremy Corbyn as our Prime Minister. And it's a very difficult, it's a very sad situation when you have an opposition that isn't able to hold the government to account properly. So, you know, it remains to be seen how we move forward, really, I guess.
And how worried are you for the next general election for party like Reform UK are going to take seats from the Conservatives? They'll almost certainly take seats from the Labour Party.
Yeah, I mean, the trouble with these with the minority parties is the system that we have, you know, is that because we do have this first past the post system, if you add together the support they have across the country, it probably would deliver you some members of Parliament in the same way that, you know, the Greens, in previous years, UKIP, would have been delivered members of Parliament under a different system. But because of the first past the post system we have, you would have to get a huge amount of support in one constituency in order to deliver a member of Parliament. And historically, that's always been very difficult to do. So over the years that I've been an MP, other parties have emerged and then disappeared.
Fallen by the wayside,
Yeah, which is why I always say it's much better to try and reform what you've got than start with a fresh piece of paper, because you never know what. Maybe that's why I'm a Conservative. It's all about conserving, isn't it?
Absolutely. Certainly, I think the upcoming local elections is going to be a testing ground for particularly some of the smaller parties, and the way that'll fall will be interesting to see the impact that it will then have on the major parties going forward.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. I think local elections these local elections in particular. I mean, in Gosport, where every local councillor's seat is up for grabs this time because of the boundary changes. So and that will, of course, it will influence decision making in Parliament. When on the other side of those elections, of course, it will. So it is important that people get out and they use their vote.
Absolutely. My theory on voting is that it should be compulsory. Whether you spoil your ballot paper or not, everybody that is entitled to vote should turn to and put a cross on a bit of paper or spoil it. But they should be forced to vote, because if you don't use your vote, then you have no right to criticise if there's something that you don't like.
And we do get some very fascinating spoiled ballot papers every time there's a general election. You get to see them all as the as the member of as the one of the candidates, and some of them are very imaginative.
Well, Dame Caroline, I have really, really enjoyed this chat with you this morning.
Thanks so much for having me. It's lovely to see you. Loving your hat, and maybe next time I should be interviewing you, because I think your story sounds much more interesting than mine.
Well, I've lived a little bit of a life.
Maybe we'll turn the tables next time.
Absolutely.
The podcast takeover. Tables are turned. Darnage in the chair.
Yes.
The Tim Heale Podcasts. Ordinary people's extraordinary stories.